on, everybody? Welcome back to Salty Runback, here to be your weekly intake of North American Developmental League of Legends. It is episode 4. The NACL regular season is fully underway, and we just got finished off our first week of the NACL qualifiers as well. I am Grapes, joined alongside Hawk. Hawk, how's your day been today?
Grapes, honestly, I'm gonna be honest. It's been a long day. I got up at like 7:30 in the morning so I could go shoot a mini documentary before my first class. So it's been a long one. I'm a little tired, but I'm excited. It's my favorite part of the week, the part where we record Salty Runback.
Tuesdays for me, I always wake up at 9 a.m. classes. I have a lot of other stuff that's going on as well, so I was up very late. Didn't get a whole lot of sleep, but I'm all awake, all excited
you
now.
You were grinding on those VODs late last night, I'm sure.
We did have 54 games of Developmental League to watch this weekend, and I did at least skim through all of them. So I am up to date, ready for this episode, and we have a very special second part today where we'll be talking to Riot Whoopley, the head of NACLQ, NACL Champions Q here at Riot Games. Maybe we could pick the mind of one of the lead members here of, the spearhead of North American Developmental.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. I'm really excited to talk to Whoopley. I honestly don't know Whoopley that well, so I'm really excited to get to know him. Hopefully he'll have some cool things to say about the scene. And Grapes, I just got to say, I really admire your dedication to at least watching every VOD. Like, I've watched, I would say, like, 70%, but there are 54 games is a lot.
There are some games where you honestly not entirely worth watching. Like you see them the first 5 minutes, you see the draft, and it's like, okay, like maybe I can move on to the next one. But
I don't know. Maybe this is the reason why I have bad takes on the teams, because I mean, spoiler alert, we don't really talk about it in this episode, but my take on Wildcard aged really poorly, like out the get. It was horrible.
Well, you can see the sign right here. That's
for real. Yeah, listen to that.
My new addition to the wall.
The forest within
Garen.
tweets. The forest within tweets about banning Garen have been so funny to me, dude.
It's been a wild time with Wild Card, and with the NACL qualifiers as well. We've been hosting a couple of unofficially streamed games over on our Twitch channel. Thank you everybody who has tuned in over these past couple of days. We've gained like 150 followers just for covering these few games. We now have like
300 Twitch followers, so shout out everyone. We really appreciate the support.
It's been a lot of fun. We'll be right back there this weekend as well. Rally Cry is starting their coverage, but we'll be right there as well, covering all the games that are not being streamed, as well as Alk Battery and Smack, so make sure to check out all those channels. Links will be in our socials. But other than that, Hawk, there's some stuff with the qualifiers and also stuff with the NACL that we got to talk about. So let's hop right into part 1 if you're not ready.
Yeah, let's go for it. A lot of things happened this week, Grapes. We had NACLQ in full swing, and as you said, NACL is I mean, at this point, like, really heating up. We're a good portion of the way through the season. We know a lot about how these teams are going, and it starts with NACLQ week 1, yeah?
Yeah, it feels like we're kind of like in a groove at this point. It's episode 4. Yeah. We've hit like our formula. We know what we're doing. Let's start off with our first topic, which is the first week of the NACL qualifiers. The GSL groups went underway. There were 8 best of 3s played between the 16 teams that have made it. And out of all those 8 series, Hawk, which one of those was the most interesting to you?
Yeah, so for me, honestly, this is a pretty clear-cut answer. I think the most interesting one was definitely the Native Gaming versus CB Gaming. Not like it wasn't the closest. It wasn't it was pretty close. Hang on. So that was 1-1, and then there was the Godel Gamers against UST. That was
I would say that was the closer one, but the more interesting one might be this one here.
Yeah, like I also agree. I think Godel against UST was a little bit closer, but first of all, these games were like bangers. Like Native and CB were going like 40 minutes in game 1, 40 minutes in game 2. Game 3 was kind of a stomp, but that one was super interesting to me because CB Gaming was coming in with some unique strategies. Like they had the Tarek and the Udyr, some of these crazy picks that I think some of us didn't really expect, and they played their style, right, and pushed the team that we think is going to be the best in the qualifier, and many people had in the top 2. I don't think anyone seeded them below 2, to the absolute brink. I mean, CB Gaming, they came in, won game 1. I'm not going to say convincingly, but they won it, and then they pushed Native Gaming time and time again. So for me, that one was by far the most interesting series, and it makes me super excited to see both CB and Native play in the future. Native for being able to edge that one out and kind of not tilt and keep their mental and win a strong game 3, and CB for taking a game off of one of the best teams.
There's a lot of highlights from CB Gaming. Of course, we knew them coming in as being these underdogs that took down Team Fish Taco and were 3-0 versus in the first 3 rounds of the OQs. But up against Native, maybe expectations were tempered a little bit. This was the Uber Eats delivery special rematch, as the OQs got delayed a little bit because the CB coach was unaware that the games had to start like right away after all the other games have concluded. Besides the point, but these two teams did play in the open qualifiers, and Native won pretty convincingly. But CB in that game 1 and even in game 2 put up a really big fight. I think Nem9 and Last Dance specifically looked really, really good throughout those two games. Last Dance on the Varus got like 3 really quick kills in game number 1 around First Dragon and kind of took over the game from there. And Kisno as well, who played 2 games of Udyr to start the series off. The team comp as a whole just worked really well, and also the Taric as well for Sandwich, which really countered Native's dive composition. Was really fun, but at the end of the day, it was still a team with messages and scooped, and they looked phenomenal, Hawk.
Yeah, oh yeah, Native looks really good, but I do want to talk about CB, and honestly, this will probably lead into our next question too, is like, CB, I love how you bring up Nem9, Kisno, and Last Dance. It does feel like they are the X factors for this team. Not that Phenomex had an excellent game in game 2, and Sandwich aren't great players, but like Nem9 in particular, right? Going from the support of Karma, Radiant Virtue Karma in game 1, onto the Yone pocket pick in game 2. Like, it's that kind of thing out of a player that like. That's interesting because Nem9 is known for the Yone. I tweeted, I'm like, messages, don't blind pick us here against Nem9. I'll play the Yone. Nem9 popped off on it, right? But to be able to also see things like the Karma, like I love the leaf that this player is turning over. I'm super excited to see Nem9 play. And the rest of CB play and the rest of the games. And Grapes, I do think this does lead directly into our next question if you're ready to move on.
Really quick, I want to shout out one more series. It'll take like 10 seconds and we'll get right back into this. Supernova versus Lit Esports I thought was a really interesting one going in. I thought Supernova was a very strong team, but if there was a team that could potentially upset in that group, it was Lit with a bunch of these young players that looked really good, coached by Pukar. And it was not even a conversation. Supernova wiped the floor. Dragoon, game 1,
Supernova
had a
looks good,
7-0 Kasante game. And in game 2, Hyper had a 12-5 Lee Sin game. Also played Silas in game number 1 and looked amazing. Onat also had some pretty good games as well. So overall, Supernova, the top side of the map, which is what I was really banking on when I first saw this roster announced, looks really, really good. I thought Munchie and Livacious might have been able to put up a decent fight against those two players with Dragoon and Hyper. Didn't really seem like the case.
Yeah, you made the right play banning out Dragoon from my B1 because, Supernova looks great. And remember, they're the 5 seed. They're the 2nd seed in that group behind Horizon. So that series, which is coming up, next week, is going to be, this coming week is going to be insane. I'm really excited to see those two teams play. But
moving on to our next topic, which is still about the NACL qualifiers. There were 4 4th seeds. All of them did get eliminated within their groups, sent down to the lower bracket, that is. And the way that it works is that they will be playing against the losers of the other series within that group, and the winner will move on to the next week of games, and the loser will be eliminated, have to wait until that next qualifier. Out of all of the number 4 seeds, Hawk, are there any of them that you think could really, surprise people, get through this week, and maybe even beyond?
Yeah, so like I said, I think all the talk about CB, last question, leads into this one, because I do think CB, they've got a shot. Actually, I don't just think they have a shot. I think CB is going to beat Winthrop this coming week. I think it's going to happen, and it's twofold. One, I think CB actually looks like a great team. We were talking about Kisno, Nem9, Last Dance, all still stands, right? But Winthrop also, again, I know I've been down on them. They've shown some flashes of brilliance, but they kind of got destroyed by Team Ambition this previous week. Now, Team Ambition looks great, so, that should be a testament to how strong Team Ambition is, I think, more than anything. But my big thing with Winthrop right now is whenever I watch them play, it looks like the team, for whatever reason, whether or not it's Frostforest's fault or the rest of the teams, it's always a team thing, right? It's not just Jungle Diff, but Frostforest has not been able to get anything going for this team, and the team looks like they rely too much on Frostforest to get things going, if that makes sense. Like, it feels like if Frostforest isn't able to, like, get a lane going to make big plays and carry into the mid game and sort of, like, Frostforest beat that bridge to mid to late, the team falls flat. And that's exactly what we saw against Team Ambition, where Sarcasm was just, like, perma-ganking Mabud top lane. Mabud didn't get to play the game. Cozy and Sarcasm are going like brazy mode, and the rest of the map for Winthrop just wasn't really able to generate pressure. And so that is sort of my concern for Winthrop. And again, I don't want this to really be like, oh, shitting on Winthrop, because I think they're good. But CB, I think... What?
CB is also good.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. Is like CB is looking like a legit team. You know, we can talk about, oh, they were an upset getting into the round of 16. They were seeded below 16. But I think at this point, based on what we've seen from this team now, 7 or 8 games in, they are a legitimate team that can contend with some of the better ones here from what we saw.
And I do think that Winthrop did have a tough matchup against Team Ambition in that first round, to be completely fair. I think that
Team Ambition's
without
great.
Aaron,
Team Ambition's great.
They still looked really good. I think Sarcasm actually was really impressive, especially considering this is actually, I think, his first competitive series in like a really long time at this level of play. But I definitely agree that CB is going to be a really fun matchup to watch. Hopefully that we'll be able to get that streamed on the Salty Runback channel, just for my selfish purposes and everything like that. Not entirely sure all the plans, but make sure you stay tuned.
It's gonna be a good match. It's gonna be a good match.
But yeah, I think they look pretty solid. That could be a really exciting one. The other team that I want to shout out really quickly is actually Conviction, who is the 16th seed headed in. They will be playing against the University of St. Trevor, and I think actually that maybe Conviction could line up decently well against UST. I think the players on UST are pretty good, but I think that when we were watching Conviction play against Maryville, it seemed like they had really good opportunities to go for different plays and things like that. They had good angles. Ivan Yang, I believe, had a Diana game that looked pretty good, and Nightstar is just a really generally solid AD carry who's going up against Aang, who is a new bot laner to the scene. If things fall the right way, I could see Conviction pulling off a really crazy upset. I'm not 100% banking on it, though, which is why I think I'm more inclined to talk about CB for this time.
Yeah. I wouldn't bank on it either. What I will say, Grapes, is I'm honestly kind of with you on this. I do think if you are Conviction, like, your bot lane has honestly looked great. And Aang and Daption, the bot lane for UST, has not looked as great. I think they've been one of the weaker ones, I think it's fair to say here. But I also think there might be a little bit of a mismatch in the mid lane with Aljun, Robbie Bob. So, but I agree with you. I would be kind of interested to see that series. That would probably be a good one. But, Grapes, before we move on, I do want to see if any of us are willing to put our money where our mouth is. Does CB or any of the other 4 seeds not just survive this week? Do they get out of groups?
If I was like a betting man putting money on it, I'd have to see the odds. But in terms of like, if it's over 50%,
like, if you're tripling your money, right?
Is there an over 50% chance of any of these 4 teams getting out? I would say no. But if the odds were like 3-1, 4-1 or something, and I get to like quadruple my money by putting a bet in, I might slide in like a couple bucks, you know.
Put in like not your life savings, but like maybe like an afternoon lunch. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think that this is something we talked about pretty repeatedly at this point. But just the way that a lot of the really top tier amateur players did get promoted up to the NACL does mean that I think there actually is a pretty decent amount of parity in this qualifier system, and upsets definitely can happen. We saw it in the OQs.
True.
I think we could definitely see it here again next week.
Yeah, I think we could. My one thing, again, Team Ambition looks so good, and that's my fear for CB, is not that they'd lose this week, but the Team Ambition might be too formidable. But yeah, that's what I got. Grapes, we want to go on to question number 3?
Yeah. 4 seeds, of course, are maybe struggling a little bit, but another team that might be struggling as we head over to the NACL for the next 3 topics of the day. 100 Thieves Challengers. They're sitting at, I believe, 7-5. Of course, this is a team that a lot of us both ranked really high in terms of the way that we like the roster construction and also just in the power rankings. I think many of us consider this team to probably be one of the highest talent level organizations and rosters that have been built, with Sniper, Unforgiven, and then also just like solid players around like Pretty and Destiny. But they haven't really gotten off to the races like we've expected, Hawk. Are we worried about this team going forward?
I would say yes, Grapes. I would say, I mean, the question is, under 100 Thieves C underperforming? Definitely yes. I think they are underperforming. Whether or not I'm worried, I guess I'm less on that train. Like, they might be able to turn it around, but I mean, I think by and large this team is absolutely underperforming. I mean, you've got Unforgiven, who, like, you can clown on it all you want, went to Worlds last year in the play-ins and was first team all-pro ADC for Mad Lions. Now coming to NACL and, like, not styling on people is like a little shocking. What?
He's been fine. He hasn't been fine. Like, stellar, like the best.
But I mean, I
league
think
level of AD
anyone
carry.
would have expected, if not to be the best ADC in the league, easy top 3. But I don't think that's happened so far. I mean, I'm looking at maybe players that we'll talk about later that have really shined in the ADC role, and Unforgiven has struggled a little bit more. And also Sniper, who is, I mean, admittedly been hyped up a lot, and it's so hard to live up to that. And I don't want to like shit on Sniper because he's 16 and still a great player, but I mean, has not been him yet so far, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us had really high expectations for Sniper, and I think a lot of us probably forgot about the fact that this is his first year in the league, and also
like,
that
it's so hard. It's so hard to live up to those expectations, right? But it hasn't happened.
yeah, and I think Sniper has had some really good games. I also think he's had some games where he has just been camped really, really hard, and it's just been impossible for him to really accomplish anything. So you have to like give credit where credit is due down there. But overall, yeah, I think that this team hasn't really, gone up to the level that we have expected them of yet. And I think this last week's matchup against C9 Challengers really kind of spoke to that. MNS just styled all over the entire team in both of those games, whether it was on Corky in game 1 or LeBlanc in game 2. It just really seemed like C9 and 100 Thieves were going to be these two teams that was going to be like a crazy battle against each other. And it just never seemed close. And the last thing before I hand it off to you again is that 100 Thieves Challengers has actually, when you look at the schedule that they have, haven't had it super difficult so far.
No,
Their
they've
matchups
not.
have been Golden Guardians with a split series with Immortals, AoE, TSM Challengers, Team Liquid Faith, and then probably their hardest opponent yet was C9, who they just did not look great against. And when you take a look at the rest of the schedule that they have, the last 5 matchups that they have are Dig Challengers, FlyQuest Challengers, Wildcard, Fear, and TL Challengers. So the last 5 matchups that they have, like, they are going to be tested very, very hard. And I think it is within these next 4 series, CLG, CLG Faith, FlyFam, and EGC, that we really need to see 100 Thieves make some, like, really big jumps, either in their team play, and I think it's mostly their team play because overall, like, each of their players have had really strong individual performances. But like their last 5 series are going to be really difficult, and if they want to, prove themselves as a top of the tier challengers team, like they're gonna have to prove it there, and it's gonna be really hard against, again, like probably 5 of the top teams in the league.
Right. And just to add briefly before we move on to the next one, I fully agree with everything you said. It just feels to me like 100 Thieves Challengers was a roster that was built to like link up this young jungler with this experienced support and mid laner and play for side lanes, whether it's like our budding superstar and Sniper or our established superstar and Unforgiven, right? And it just feels like that hasn't really happened, at least the way that I think we were expecting, but there is still time. Like, it's early spring. We're only about halfway through, not quite halfway through the first half of this the first split, right? So I'm not gonna hit the panic button. I'm not gonna say I'm worried about 100 Thieves Challengers, especially because 100 Thieves as an organization is one that has proven that they are capable of developing talent as well. But it is, I like what I'll leave it at is they have underperformed. They've not been able to play that mid to side style that I think we sort of expected, and it has showed, as you've said.
Yeah, I think that, again, these next couple weeks are going to be really telling. If we see some big adjustments, that's it. Like, all of these conversations that we have had in the past few minutes, like, won't matter at all because they've found their groove.
Maybe we're reverse caster cursing them right now, like I have to Wildcard, CB Gaming, a little bit of Winthrop.
Seems to be a bit of a trend here on this show throughout the first few episodes. And speaking of, we might be accidentally caster cursing another team as we head into our next topic. A team that has been performing relatively well recently is Golden Guardians Challengers. They started the first week of NACL 2 and 4, and since then they have gone 7-1. Going to take a look at their strength of schedule here. They have went 1-1 versus Fear and AoE, and they have 2-0 TL Faith, TSM, and Immortals Challengers in the last few weeks. Of course, strength of schedule, not great, but we were looking at 100 Thieves. They played very similar caliber of opponents, and so far, Golden Guardians have performed better. I know this was a roster that we didn't have as much hope on, Hawk, in terms of just pure strength and power rankings, but are they a new contender to enter into this league?
Well, and I think this is an interesting question. First of all, Grapes, knock on wood, but I was super hype about Young and Array from the start of the season and did not, to this point, caster curse them, clearly, because they're sitting at 9-5. So, like, maybe it doesn't apply here, hopefully. But anyway, I mean, my point basically still stands. I'm still super hype on Young and Array, and it's been good to see that Golden Guardians Challengers has, for lack of a better term, I guess, kind of taken out the trash a little bit. You know, they've beaten these teams below them 2-0 on the standings. Now, again, I'm still waiting for them to play some of the top teams, and that's why, I guess to answer the question, I am not going to say I think they're a top-tier contender. I don't think they're going to be at that Dig C, fucking Sphere and Wildcard, and, like, TL level. However, I think this team will be, like leading the pack, if you know what I mean. Like, at the top, there will be, like, the best 5 teams, and then Golden Guardians will be, like, solidly in that tier 2. Like, number 1 team in the tier 2, sort of the gatekeepers of that. And the reason I say that is because at the beginning of the season, when they were losing a little bit, I felt like Young and Array were trying to 2v9, and it wasn't really working. And sometimes it would, and sometimes they'd win games, and sometimes they'd lose them. But what we've seen since then is that Young and Array have still been kind of like 2v9ing, but they've been winning games because I think Concept, Rosethorn, and Prismal have started to overall look and play a lot better, and the team has realized that, like, hey, let's just play to these 2 carries that are, I mean, honestly, smurfing on NACL. Like, I think people thought that Array was a great ADC. I think people thought that Young, would be an exciting new prospect. But Young and Array Grapes, they've looked excellent. I mean, they have looked
they have been really
top
good.
5 in their roles. I've been so impressed with the carry play from Golden Guardians Challenger, and with Frost Forest, Prismal, and Concept potentially being able to gain some consistency, and even Concept like having a couple carry performances, could be really excited for this team.
Yeah, Concept had a good Jax game this week, and also had a really good Scion game, which I know is not the most exciting thing, but he was against Cassante, which is a pretty difficult matchup for a Scion. Was able to survive and just became unkillable later on in the matchup. Like, the way that this guy plays tanks, and I know he has a weird champion pool, but it's really, really impressive as somebody who plays a lot of top lane. Maybe not as high elo, obviously. But speaking of the rest of the team, I know that Young and Array are also...
Grapes, hang on. Your top lane felt absolutely Challenger when I was getting setted on for the entire caster show.
Oh, yeah.
You would just
cast a showdown.
Do the age-old strategy.
I did get praised by Bradley and Darkwings of my lane prowess. So that
they wanted a VOD review with you, I'm pretty sure.
Hey, invitation's still open. Hop on the pod.
Oh my, that would be great content. Hey, Bradley and Darkwings, if you're watching, we should do a VOD review on Salty Runback.
Closing off on Golden Guardians just really quickly. Of course, Young and Array have continued to look really, really good. I think Young on these melee mid laners, Cassidy specifically, has been really impressive to watch. But also, just again, want to shout out some of the players that maybe weren't as consistent in that first week where Golden Guardians was definitely struggling in Rosethorn and Prismal. I think Prismal obviously had a crazy game on Heimerdinger. Did you see that when he ran into the bush underneath the tier 2 turret, level 5 as Heimerdinger, and just one-shot Mia under the turret as she was walking back to base?
Oh, no, I missed that. That was one of the VODs that I kind of skipped through.
So he did that, and also level 3 on Heimerdinger, he just walked into City's jungle, who's playing Maokai.
Giga Chad. Oh my god, just like River Heimer.
Just clearing down, first clear onto the red buff. Prismo on Heimerdinger just walks in, one-shots Rosethorn, one-shot City Witty, and at that point the game's over. But
wow.
Prismo's
That's
been really
awesome.
impressive alongside Array. And then also Rosethorn, I think it's had some really impressive performances throughout these couple of weeks.
Rosethorn tweeted, he was like, I love Sejuani. He's doing like the Yankos tweet. Like,
he loves Sejuani. And honestly, he's like no meme intended. He's been very good at the Sejuani. He's been running around to all these lanes, whether it's like going for aggressive ganks with, again, the double melees that they often run in the solo lanes, or just like protecting Array and Prismal down in the bot lane. Like, it's been really impressive to watch. As somebody who doesn't necessarily like study VODs like super intently when they're watching, I still notice Rosethorn like having really good games, like in the first 15 minutes on Sejuani and other champions as well. And so I think that this team, of course, has looked good against, I think they played TSM and also TL First in these week 3. Going forward, we'll see how good they perform, but if the pieces continue to click, I'm really excited about the way that this team will continue to grow, not only into the playoffs, but maybe into the summer split as well.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add that we might not have explicitly covered is, like you said, Prismal's been playing really well, and a big part of that too, I think Prismal's laning has looked a lot better. Like, it felt like in the beginning, it was like, if we're not on Lucian Nami, bot lane phase was like maybe a little sus. Array and Prismo both, they've been laning really well. They've been getting themselves that little bit of an advantage, like Giga Chad Prismo, I guess, playing fucking Riverheimer. Like,
Yeah, that's crazy.
you know, like, but they've been more self-sufficient down there and being able to scale Array up to be that big carry. So shout out to Prismo for that too. Yeah, that's all I got. I agree. I'm not gonna sit here and say I don't think. I will say I don't think GGC is guaranteed top contender, but I am excited to see them compete, and I think they will be at the very least a competitor.
Very well. I think that's a good place to wrap up on Golden Guardians. This is just how the show is going to work for some of these weeks where there's not a ton of like super important like matches in terms of playoff implications and stuff for NACL. We'll just talk about some teams that we think are good. And speaking about that, our last topic of the day is Dignitas Challengers, who is currently sitting in first place in the standings. And a Hawk. They also have a last place LCS team who is sitting at 0-4. I know that it might be a bit of a memey question to close this out, but do you see a situation where any of these Dig Challenger players just hop into LCS and make an immediate impact on that team?
Yeah, it's honestly, it's a really interesting question. So just to give everyone the LCS standings real quick, in case you haven't been following super closely, at the bottom at 0-4, we have Golden Guardians and Dignitas, and then also IMT is at 1-3. So that's sort of like the bottom. Then we kind of got like a little bit of a soup of like a bunch of teams at 2-2. So those are sort of the three that I'm looking at. And it's funny because Dig having the last place LCS roster, I honestly probably pretty unexpected. And I mean, at least I'll start by answering for Dig specifically. I don't think there's any way a team is benching Arma, Santorin, or Jensen. Like I don't think Dignitas would do that. So I'm really looking at the bottom lane, which is in LCS spawn and Ignar / Biofrost, I think has been subbing.
Biofrost
if I'm not
has played
mistaken.
these past couple weeks, yeah.
Yeah, so Bio. And then in Academy, that is Tomo and Diamond, or Challengers is Tomo and Diamond. So fortunately, Grapes, if you're Tomo and Diamond, I think they have been the best part of this Dignitas Challengers team. Not that the whole team hasn't been doing great, of course, but Tomo and Diamond have been kind of destroying some pretty good bot lanes. Like, I think of a couple weeks ago, they're 2-0 against CLG Challenger, a team that we thought maybe was a little bit more top table, maybe not so much anymore, but just Tomo and Diamond absolutely destroyed Michi and Breezy 2 games in a row on the Caitlyn lane, and I mean, they are looking legit.
Yeah, this week, Tomo and Diamond played against FlyFam, who they actually got 2v2 killed against by Instinct and Sword once in game number 1, so that's something maybe kind of keep in mind. They ended up winning the game anyway. And also against EG, Mobility, and Smoothie, they played Caitlyn Varus and then Lucian Nami, and just, it was a clinic. It was just absolutely disgusting. And Tomo and Diamond, they've been playing together for a few years, both on FlyQuest and also now here on Dignitas. And these two players actually were part of a situation in 2021, I think, when FlyQuest traded Licorice to Golden Guardians and then swapped their entire Academy roster up to the LCS. So Tomo and Diamond have had the experience of being up in the LCS as a duo before. Maybe that's a situation that we could see potentially again. And last thing, before I turn it over to you for some final thoughts, of course, Jensen is one of the greatest mid laners in the LCS history. But we know his champ pool. He plays some pretty basic things. And if we want to spice it up in the mid lane, we have a player on our Academy roster, Hawk, who has played 2 games straight of Udyr mid and has dominated both. So if we're looking for some spice, some wild cards be thrown in there for Dignitas to turn the season around. Insanity, maybe he's one of the best mid laners in the Challenger series for sure.
Yeah, I will say, in outside of just Dig, to talk about the other teams too. I don't think, first of all, I think Golden Guardians is like the best 0-4 team I've ever seen. Now they're still kind of shit, which is why they're 0-4. but they're like, I think Golden Guardians is better than Immortals and Dig. That's gonna be my take. I don't think they've played either of those teams yet either. So that's my take on that. So if I'm Golden Guardians, maybe 6A is like the one person I'm looking at, but honestly 6A's played fine, and I think the rest of the team like maybe just needs to get it together a little bit more, a little bit less int from top lane or something. I don't know. So that's that. However, if we're talking about Insanity, I do also think there's an argument to be made for Insanity getting picked up by IMT to go in for ABO. I've never been a huge ABO fan. I think ABO is good, but not great. And I do think Insanity, in his short time in the LCS, had moments of like decentness on a really bad team. And now having gone back to Challengers for the past year plus, even being an amateur on 100 Thieves next for a little bit, I think Insanity is one of the best mid laners in the scene, as you said, and so I'm not even just going up over Jensen, but if you're a team looking at challengers for a mid laner, if you're Immortals, if you want a new mid laner, maybe Insanity's an option there.
Yeah, and also M&S exists, but I really doubt
That's
that
true
G9
too.
is not going to just charge $5 billion to buy him out. So that's kind of out the window, I feel like, at this point. But overall, Dig Challengers, of course, looked really good, and it's really fun to see that because I think the main point of why people were maybe underrating this roster a little bit going in is because we didn't see any talent that could potentially feel ready to jump into the LCS. And the fact that we're having this conversation shows that we were wrong.
Yeah.
And that these players definitely are, worthy of being in first place.
I'm impressed. I mean, seriously, Dig Challengers playing great. Their bot lane is smurfing. The rest of the map is holding it together. As you said, Insanity is pretty insane at the game. I mean, we're talking a lot about Insanity in the bot lane. I do think it's fair to say those are sort of like the strongest points of this roster, but obviously for them to be at the top of the standings, something is going well for the whole team.
That's right. And I think that does it for our headline talk. Really short, condensed, but very,
we actually kept it
solid
at a half hour this time.
segment. I feel like we got a lot of good stuff out of that.
Yeah.
Out of the 5 questions that we had. But that's going to do it for our headlines. We're going to swap our scenes, and when we come back in, I guess, the snap of a finger, we'll be with Riot Whoopley to talk about all things NA Amateur. Hello, we are back with a very special guest alongside us, Riot Whoopley, director of NACL, ChampsQ, a couple other things. Whoopley, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's just a work day for me, so naturally carving out some time in the afternoon for a quick interview.
my first question
before
before we do any introductions is what kind of bribes have you taken from Wildcard to tell all the other teams to not ban Garen?
Dude, Wildcard's pick ban has been one of my favorite narratives across all of the NACL. It's been so much fun to watch. Especially, I think the highlight for me was that Fiora backdoor.
That was awesome.
I tweeted about it. I literally jumped out of my seat. I was like, oh, there's no shot. I was like, we literally had an XPEG moment on our broadcast. It was so cool.
Yeah, that was hype. That was hype as hell. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us, Whoopley. I know you're, of course, probably can introduce yourself way better, but you are the director of NACL activities in some way or another. Why don't you give us the introduction for the people that may or may not know who you are?
Sure. So, hello, Internet. I am Whoopley, and a lot of people just know me as the CQ guy, because out of all my projects, that one was the one that took off quite a bit last year. But I'm also the director for NACL, aka the Salt League. So I've worked, I guess, like a just quick short history. I've worked at Riot close to 6 years now, and I was an intern in esports before that. Did stints in player management before my current role, which was working with the pro players directly, sort of before even like there was a players association, sort of, just talking with them. And then, in case anyone's curious, I went to UCSD and studied in social psychology. So very clearly one-to-one correlation to what I do now.
I'm also a psych major, so that's an interesting little correlation there. You decided you did go to UCSD.
I'm not a psych major.
In the open qualifiers. Were you rooting for them? Any
I
extra
saw
favoritism?
I don't think they did very well, which is unfortunate. But
they were seated a little low at 32, so it happens.
You know what? They made it into the top 32, and
true.
so for that, I'm just like,
I voted for him just for you. I saying that retroactively, of course, not knowing you went to UCSD, but
I think it's really cool to have you on again. Just really quickly, how long have you been working in this like proving ground circuit scene at Riot?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So the actual answer is sort of like unclear, because so basically like my roots in college meant that I was super involved in sort of like amateur and collegiate esports for a while. So like even though I wasn't officially in this role for like most of my career at Riot, I still like helped out. So I've been helping out with scouting grounds, for example, every single year, and worked a lot with the previous owner for a lot of this stuff. He goes by Riot Ice Chest, if anyone knows him, for just all of this sort of like amateur stuff. Just because like I was very, passionate about the space. Like it's something that I was pretty familiar with. So for me, like moving into this role and taking over more ownership was just sort of something that like I guess was, I don't want to say natural because that feels weird, but just like intuitive because I've already been working on it quite a bit, like unofficially or just sort of ad hoc between other stuff. Also, just to throw it out there, because I think these sort of like fun facts are cool. Like I've worked on a bunch of random stuff, as is usually the case with Riot. So like at one point, I managed the Legends of Runeterra esports broadcast in North America.
Oh, nice.
I was also helped out with the Watch Party program at some point. Just using sort of my pro experience, and then on the site background, I also did a bunch of surveys at some point, doing like some fandom research for like figuring out who people's favorite pros were and favorite teams, and so I've done a bunch of random stuff.
Are those the surveys that like pop up after you finish a solo queue game and it's like ask for we need your feedback?
That was one of those surveys. Yep.
Wow.
I got
Nice.
to do one of those for what is your favorite pro player in the
Right.
LCS?
I may or may not have ignored them, so
Yeah.
no offense.
Well,
no offense, hopefully.
it always feels a little bit targeted when I like run it 0-10 in my rank game, and then it's like I get a survey. It's like, how would you rate your gameplay experience? And I'm like,
10 out of 10 always, right?
of course, yeah, of course.
Okay, yeah, so moving back a little bit to just kind of NACL and things like that. Obviously, you were part of the team last year, which I thought was a part of a ton of success in terms of amateur and semi-pro League of Legends. And now coming to 2023, a couple of really big changes were made, obviously, with the NACL being introduced, as well as a new qualifier system, promotion relegations. Would you mind giving us a little bit of insight as to how you guys decided on making some of these changes and why the last year's system might not have worked out as well as the new programs that you have implemented for this season?
Okay, so this is the question I was most excited to sort of talk about because, like, man, I could go on for so long.
We have all.
So
we have
I'll
a
try
lot
to.
of time.
We got time.
Okay, I was gonna say I'll try to give you like the short version, but this stuff I think is like super interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
And like I haven't really gotten a chance to share, and I don't know how many people like have insight into sort of a lot of the Riot thought process around a lot of this stuff. So the short version is that essentially where we are now with like LCS Challengers and the Salt League and like the new rebrand and the new format is kind of just a long-term evolution of I think what we've been trying to do and solve problems for in the ecosystem for like literally years. So taking it way back to before franchising, we had the Challenger series, which was super cool, start of esports, like start of the LCS, and then at some point we sort of we went through franchising, right, which was really good for the league because it increased sustainability with teams, and then also that's when we introduced the academy system because that was where it was sort of like 10-man roster. Here's an opportunity to develop talent to for these teams to sort of get additional investment into the scene. But one of the problems that sprung up in the feedback that we heard from the community over the couple of years was like it just kind of cut things off for talent development in the sense of like it was a closed ecosystem, right? And you wanted to go pro, it was kind of hard to figure out the best way to actually do that, right? Because a lot of people felt, and this, a lot of feedback we heard was like, well, it's kind of just like a bit of luck. It's kind of a little bit of who you know, right? There's no clear, direct one-to-one path if you're someone who wants to go pro to actually make it into the league. So a lot of the changes that we've been working on the past couple of years are sort of trying to address that problem, right? The idea of like, if you're a pro, how do we actually create competitive systems for you and your 4 friends if you wanted to just climb to the ranks and really showcase that you're, a top talent that teams should be looking at. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm sure you guys are familiar with last year around Proving Grounds and the Proving Grounds circuit was sort of iterations on that. Our first sort of step, which I think was like 2 years ago now, was the Proving Grounds circuit. And for that one, in their first year, we just partnered with a bunch of the grassroots organizations that have been keeping the amateur scene alive. organizations like Risen, for example, right? Like we worked with. Over the years on that one, we sort of heard that working with a bunch of different partners was actually kind of confusing for players and teams with all of the different rule books and all of the different schedules and signups and info locations. So we've been sort of condensing the ecosystem or streamlining it a bit. And so bringing us all the way back to today, basically, we've seen a lot of success with, I think, the Proving Grounds format. And heading into this year, there was a lot of really exciting things we could do to continue to sort of iterate on what we thought a lot of the more successful pieces of that. The idea of having like the David versus Goliath, system where you can have all of these, amateur teams, these semi-pro teams face off against, Academy or now Challenger teams. So that's sort of like the quick and dirty history of sort of like way back to some of the problems that we faced all the way back in franchising to sort of the natural evolution of the ecosystem over the years.
Wow. That was very in-depth. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's a really cool bit of history. And one thing that does stick out is, you sort of talked about how it started with Proving Grounds a couple years ago, but then coming into this year, a big part of it was obviously the rebrand back, I guess, to NACL. Was there any sort of particular reason why that rebrand was done? Perhaps a shift in perception for the community or something like that?
Yeah, so a couple of reasons.
It's because the word salt is really funny.
Right, yeah, it's for the memes purely, right?
That is an agenda that I pushed heavily. I'm all about leaning into the salt memes. I think.
Clearly we got.
Yep, huge fan. So there's a lot of different things we were trying to hit with the rebrand specifically. A lot of that did touch on the complexity of the ecosystem before, because sort of just naturally, sort of as we introduced more elements, we introduced additional complexity. So I'm sure you guys remember, but we had the classic 6-line acronym where it was the Proving Grounds Circuit Qualifier Spring number 1, right?
Yep. Right.
Everyone, super simple ecosystem. Everyone understands exactly, right? So if the goal is to try to actually get talent to sign up for these tournaments and to raise visibility on this stuff, having that probably wasn't ideal. And then branding wise, we had Academy, which sort of served its purpose, but the ecosystem has sort of evolved over the years. And with the new format changes, there was an opportunity to sort of revisit that. Then we had Proving Grounds, and then we had the Proving Grounds Circuit Qualifiers. So a big goal for the rebrand was literally just to smush it all together. And I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more, but the qualifiers are also a big piece of that, where it's we want it to feel like one ecosystem. And I think we really had an opportunity with the format changes to make it feel like it, right? We had a through line idea of hey, if you're competing in the qualifiers, you can literally make it into the actual Challengers League, which, wasn't possible with the old Academy system. We had Proving Grounds as sort of the middle ground of the two, but we're okay, cool. There's an opportunity to sort of not hit the reset button, but really reestablish, I think, based on the new format, sort of what this ecosystem meant, and try to simplify it, streamline it, make it feel more accessible, make it feel more collective as a whole. And then also just an opportunity, I think, from the branding perspective. Was there some lag there? I don't know.
I think there's just a little bit, but you're good now. Yeah.
We're good. Okay. But on the branding side, there was also an opportunity to try to infuse more life into it, I guess. So just blatantly Challengers feels a little bit more exciting than Academy.
Right.
And Academy was good from the branding side because it sort of signaled the talent development purpose of the ecosystem. But I don't know, how closely you watched the Academy League last year compared to other years, but we also tried to experiment a lot on the broadcast side with the tone specifically, and trying to develop more of its own voice on the broadcast. And so the rebrand this year was also a reflection of our investment in the broadcast space and working with Kelsey last year, to sort of, really develop it in our own identity, and sort of bringing the Challengers naming was another way to sort of, reinforce that.
Yeah, big fan of Kelsey. Obviously, big fan of Emily as well, who is now the new director. Me, Hawk, and I worked a lot with her last year on the PGCQ.
Big fan.
And
yep.
I think the stuff that the broadcast has been doing was really cool, and I love to see how it continues to be refined week after week, which I think is a really interesting thing. My favorite segment that they do is, of course, the Super Heavyweight Smackdown that Deserex and Kangas edit every week. I tuned into one of Deserex's streams a couple weeks ago, and it was just him fully all the lights were turned off. He just has his audio mixers on, and he's just putting in different guitar beats and drums for all the songs, and he's just
That's just crazy, man. With all that music, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean the one thing that there's a lot of reasons I think why it's super great to work in like the amateur academy, now challenger space. And one of the things that's just consistently true every year is just the pure passion of like not only the team's players, but then there's the talent. I mean, we're spoiled, to be honest. We have too many talented people at this level that are, want to be a part of the broadcast and make content. So our struggle is just like, how do we get everyone involved?
Yeah.
Being belovedly scuffed in terms of content as well, I think it really elevates a lot of the stuff that has been going on. But shifting back a little bit just towards the league as a whole, I know there's, like, with the introduction of 6 new provisional teams into the ecosystem, obviously it allows for more competition at the top with the amateur teams. But then something that we were talking about on the first episode of this show, when we were kind of introducing the new format, is the qualifiers as a whole kind of generally haven't changed too much in terms of format. It's still the 32 team open qualifier into this GSL, into playoffs, into like points earners go to the next stage. But without the implementation of like a full proving ground system where these amateur teams can play against all of the challenger teams in that bracket, as well as the fact that some of the like top players that would have been in that circuit last year now get chances in the NACL. It seemed like maybe the level of competition was going to be weaker at this level. I think it's been really fun to watch the qualifiers, but that definitely is something that has been on our minds in the last couple of weeks. Was this something that you guys were weighing when considering this new system and how the qualifiers interact with the challenger scene as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's, I think, going to be one of the main questions that determines, like, hey, is this idea a good idea? Should we continue to sort of iterate on this sort of increased cross between everything? It's like, is the talent that are competing versus, the challenger teams, can they actually stand up against it, right? Is it functioning as an alternative pipeline of folks coming in to, really make an impact and feel competitive? And I think so far the answer has been even more so than we thought, yes, based on just the standings. But it is super interesting because, like, there's sort of I'd say, and this may be like going on a bit of a tangent, but I think it's interesting, so I'm going to do it anyway.
Go for it. Yeah,
Go for
that's
it,
why
yes.
we're here. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because I feel like there's sort of 2 general philosophies in terms of talent development when you look at like the format and the ecosystem. One, which is traditionally how the LCS teams approach it, is like the goal is not to win, the goal is to develop talent, and so it's less about like the actual outcome and more about the inputs and trying to develop talent week over week. And it's not necessarily about the results as long as you feel like you're actually fostering, good habits, good practice for the players that you're trying to develop. And on the other side, you have the like very just like, succeed or die, sort of like style of talent development where like if you really wanted to go the complete opposite direction and be like, all right, nobody's safe, like it only matter, like everything is open relegation, like something crazy, right? Like what you see potentially in other esports. And I think the cool thing about our ecosystem is we actually kind of get the best of both worlds. So one of the awkward things is like, how do you actually balance those two with like some teams being able to be relegated and some teams not? But I think like, in terms of trying to balance the 2 different like talent development philosophies, I think it's actually super healthy that a lot of these, outside organizations can come in, sort of like say like, hey, we actually, know how to provide really good competition. Like these are some players that can be like good sparring partners essentially for the LCS organizations who are in parallel trying to develop players for, their LCS team. So it's a cool little, I don't want to say experiment because it's an entire, future ecosystem, but like it's fun to be able to put these like talent development theories to the test and like see how they end up working out, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, like we are a talent development league, and success means that these players are getting promoted to the LCS. And so like the question we're trying to solve for is just like, how do we actually build a system that most lends itself to those type of results?
I love the idea of all the teams and players in the NACL just being the guinea pigs in this experiment. But hey, I mean, it's a pretty good experiment, it seems like. So
hopefully it's fun to compete. Hopefully it's still giving out.
We're all just pawns in Riot's game. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. But also, of course, you said that before you were sort of known as the Champions Queue guy. Now, of course, the NACL guy as well. But speaking of Champions Queue, obviously there's been a lot of conversation around Champions Queue over the last year or so now. I think that it's been a thing. And I mean, some good, some bad. And I guess I just kind of want to open the floor to you on sort of some of your thoughts on Champions Queue being someone on the other side and maybe what public perception might not know about, and also sort of what goes into that, and maybe any changes or any sort of goals with that?
Yeah, Champions Queue is weird, man.
I'm a
It's
huge
it's
fan of all the streams that happen for like the first couple of weeks, and then
Right.
after that,
There was like
sometimes
the
I see
Twitter
some,
bot,
sometimes
you
I don't.
know? It was
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. Champions Queue has been so interesting because, like, at least internally on the Riot side, like it is very unique, right? It's a crossover between esports and live gameplay in a way that, like, I don't know, has really happened before in League, and feels like really cutting edge and really exciting for that reason. Where it's like, we're coming in on the esports side, like saying, okay, cool, what is the problem that pros have been pointing to for the last, however long since the server moved, which is like the ping, right? That is what everyone said was like, hey, this is the reason why, we're being held back. Like, addressing this problem is going to go a long way to, elevating the practice of the region. So on the Riot side, it's like, cool, what can we do to address it? And
Yeah.
Champions Queue is sort of our solution for that. And it's been, I mean, at least on this side, it's definitely, I think, been more of a success than anything else. Like, seeing the activity and excitement around Worlds was, I mean, just personally, like, so crazy, just seeing the overwhelming amount of like engagement for everyone. And then obviously with like EU Champions Queue launching as well, it's sort of exciting to see, because I think a lot of the Worlds players who came to visit North America during Worlds also was like, hey, there's actually a lot of value here, even outside of the ping, in terms of like, this pro player sort of practice environment. Now, obviously, it'd be disingenuous to say that there haven't, been issues as we sort of like
Yeah.
actively develop the product in real time. But it's been really interesting because we've been working with the gameplay team throughout the entirety of last year to try to figure out like how to make Champions Queue the best it can be, and balancing that against live gameplay, and the hope being that basically both systems can thrive. But the other thing that I'll just say, since I usually don't get to talk about Champions Queue much, is that it is interesting, like, hearing a lot of the discussion around like what does it mean for Champions Queue to be successful or not, because at the end of the day, like, it's just a tool that pros can use or choose not to, right? Like, it's a tool that hopefully addresses a lot of the concerns that they have around their general practice schedule. But I think a lot of fans in particular sort of like feel like, oh, if pros aren't using it, that means like, the pros aren't practicing, or something like that, right? Like, that is, I think, the interesting thing that's been, in trying to like follow all of the conversation, the narrative that sort of popped up. But at the end of the day, we're basically just trying to make the best tool to address some of the unmet needs of the pro population in order to improve practice. And like, either it does a good job and pros are interested, or it just doesn't meet the needs relative to other tools. So it's been interesting to try to explore that space, because there's definitely something there, right? Based
Yeah.
on the engagement and sort of interest. It's just trying to figure out like, what are those pieces, and how do we continue to develop it to better serve those needs.
I know obviously the servers went down for a couple of weeks, just as ranked season was starting up and everything like that. I believe it's opening up very soon. Is that correct again for NA?
Yeah, we don't have a specific date, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's sometime this month. Basically, we're just chatting with players and teams and the Players Association around like, hey, when is a good time to turn this back on? Um, Riot could definitely take the L on the timing for that one. Basically, we're talking with teams at the beginning of the year. We had the international kickoff event, so we knew players and teams were going to be on in town. So a lot of folks floated the idea of like, hey, it'd be nice if Champions Queue was online. But the big thing was that ranked also came online at the same time, which was not an issue that we ran into last year, because
Right.
Champions Queue wasn't ready at that time, right? Champions Queue last year released in February after the ranked season had already started. And so, one of the things that we learned this year was like, oh, okay, so once ranked comes online, we want to steer clear of that window, because everyone's just, super excited about the new season and wanting to, climb back to Challenger. And so, as sort of, basically we're keeping a pulse on how the pros are feeling about that right now, to figure out the best timing for when to turn it back on with some hopefully exciting new features that we've talked about. So things like, bring back LCS player priority, which is something that we developed during Worlds, for the Worlds players, and then also the new pick ban, because right now, and I don't know how many people know this, but it uses the tournament draft system, which is the same
Yeah.
as scrims. And one of the feedback pieces that we're trying to address right now is that pros have felt like it's too much like scrims. They want it a little bit more like solo queue, so we're trying to implement a solo queue pick ban system.
I had one last question about Champs Cube before we move on to some of the other parts of topics that we had. Obviously, with the introduction at the beginning of the season, there weren't the 16 qualified NACLQ teams and those
Yep.
players to get into the system yet. I know that especially during Worlds, a lot of the amateur players like really took advantage of the opportunity to play in Champions Queue. APA and Messages specifically are players that I was really high on, of course, in Champs Queue. APA now on Team Liquid Challengers, and Messages on Native had some really crazy moments in that I saw got clipped on Twitter and stuff like that. Do you think that this is going to be helpful, just increasing the player base a little bit, or is it more about just generating excitement from some of the other bases of players?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of timing, like that was, I think, one of the other things that we were experimenting with is like how many players do we actually need in order for Champions Queue games to be popping? And we had some at the start of the year, and then now, obviously, with the qualifiers starting, we're getting the batch of players in. So I'm realizing now that I started talking and forgot your question, but they will be.
Basically, yeah. Like, do we think that that's going to help out?
Yes. So they'll be in. They're basically funneling into the server right now. So that'll be a group that we also have. We essentially have the full Champions Queue cohort ready to go for when we turn it back on.
Nice. I'm excited. I'm hoping the streams all come back up. Like Grape said, I loved following all those streams. Especially like when the Twitter bot was going. That was always so cool. Like, it was funny when you'd see, especially during Worlds Champs Queue, right? When it was like, oh, you have like Faker and like, what was the Faker RJS? Was that the big meme that?
Yeah.
Which I thought was so funny. Oh,
dude,
man.
I cannot believe that we had like literally, the world champion finals teams playing Champions Queue, something that I got to work on. I was like, personally, I was freaking out. I was fanboying so hard. It was great. Literally, content creators from like around the globe who I just like watched on my own time were like covering it. So I was like excitedly DMing like, oh, dude, that was sick from like, the last
K-Troll was
stream.
playing on it.
Yeah, K-Troll was playing.
Yeah, that was fun. And hopefully, I think as like a general note, taking that comment more generally, hopefully what's seen in a lot of the things that like we try to do with either NACL or Champions Queue is just be responsive to feedback. So for example, like the reason I mentioned the cage rules thing specifically is we ended up adjusting our policy in the middle of Worlds to, try opening it up to more players that, previously didn't have access. So in general, like hopefully, small iterations, like even the NACL stuff with like the qualifier committee, right? That was something that we heard from feedback at the end of last year, implemented late summer, carried over to this year. We're constantly trying to make like small iterations based on feedback. So
fair enough. I mean, that's always a great system, and it has truly been. It's been interesting to follow whenever it's on. I also, the other thing that I love, the last thing about Champions Queue, I think, is also it convinced, I think it was ADD, that Teemo was a good pick into Aatrox at Worlds, and then you picked it.
Dude, I could not believe that like
he won.
Champions Queue was like having such an impact on stuff like that. I was like,
it was so funny.
That at Champions Queue.
I could not believe that. I mean, that was the funniest thing ever. So I mean, hey, but that's the point. And I mean, it was so fun to follow that kind of stuff. But I guess shifting gears a little bit more back to NACL a little bit, but maybe a little bit less on the business end. Not that a parent would ever choose a favorite between their children, but is there an NACL fan or rather team or an NACLQ team that you just love some of the players, think are super fun to watch? I don't know.
I just gotta say, there's so many great teams and players. It's just so hard to choose one.
That's fair. That's fair enough. That's fair enough.
I will
that's
say
the classic.
The thing that I can say is that I'm also personally just a fan of like how this, like I mentioned earlier, but the David versus Goliath like type narratives that sort of naturally come about in the format. Like to me, that's just really exciting, and especially like. We literally brought relegation promotion back. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah, I'm so excited.
I was like so excited. I mean, from the old Challenger series, like it's very stressful for the teams that actually have to go through that process. But like as a fan, it's really exciting to watch because it's like, what more higher stakes could you ask for, right? Like this is to me, I think, going to add so much, hopefully, interest and investment in trying to follow a lot of these storylines, given the grand implications this year.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of like NACLQ teams who have like managers or coaches, like Native and Ambition specifically.
Yeah.
Been, like all about like, yep, we're not gonna feel bad when we relegate one of the teams up there. And that's just been a really cool thing to watch. Like, how good can you really get before that last tournament against teams that have had a lot of extra experience against like tons of really, really talented players. And I'm really excited to see how that actually works out, and if any teams actually do get knocked out.
Yeah, one specific nugget of info I can share around that is that one of the comments that sort of popped up when we announced a lot of the new format stuff was like, oh, 4 teams getting relegated at the in between spring and summer. Like that seems like a lot, but a lot of that was actually very intentional because like we had to actually figure out a way to like start the league, so we did the application process. But like what that's signaling hopefully is that like at the end of the day we want the promotion relegation system to be what ends up surfacing these teams sort of naturally. So I think like heading into summer I would expect there to be potentially some shifts between spring and summer, especially during the first promotion relegation. Since it's like the first, proper implementation of like, all right, if you think you got a shot, feel free to take a stab.
I'm super excited to see that. I know we're running a little bit low on time, but we do have one activity that Hawk and I have planned for you. You work at Riot Whoopley, of course. And we play the game League of Legends and watch League of Legends Esports, just like a lot of us, a lot of the people that are watching this show. And sometimes we think, there's some things that maybe we would like to see out of Riot Games, whether it's about the game specifically, about the new systems in NACL and Champions Queue and things like that, stuff that I know that you personally have a lot of impact on. And so what we're going to do here is we each have 2 suggestions for you, and you have to basically approve us or deny us here on this whiteboard. Hawk, if you wanna take the floor here.
Just I'm so excited to make commitments that you'll totally hold me accountable to fundamental changes to the ecosystem. I'm thrilled.
We are going to do what the entirety of Reddit has always dreamed of, which is get the worst suggestions possible directly to Riot. All right, so I got the first one on deck here. Basically, if Champions Queue needs players, I may be piss slow, but why don't I have an account?
I don't know how to say this politely, but you see there are certain solo queue rank requirements associated with it and certain qualifications where it might be a bit of a skill issue here.
I did finish 3rd place in the caster tournament that happened last December. So top 3 in a specific event.
Why don't after this we'll connect via DM.
No! Oh, my heart!
It's just a skill difference, Hawk. I'm sorry. I beat Hawk in the 3rd place game. That's all that matters. Maybe really quickly, just kind of about this a little bit. Maybe not as memey as Hawk recommended, but just high elo solo queue players in Champs Queue specifically. Is that something that you have considered at any point?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the other consistent, feedback or comments we hear from players. It's like, hey, why is, Champions Queue not more accessible to the general player population? This is a super nuanced conversation, but the short version of it is essentially trying to find the balance between solo queue and Champions Queue because we want both to thrive. And so Champions Queue is much more oriented towards a competitive ecosystem. So all of the access requirements are through our competitive pipelines. That's why if you want to get in, obviously, signing to an LCS or Challengers team is difficult. But if you're able to make it through the open qualifier, then it's sort of the connective competitive tissue for access there. It's not to say it's never off the table, but at the end of the day, it is a competitive tool designed for elevating the practice experience for players who are actively pursuing pro. And solo queue serves a different audience than that. So it's not to say it's never off the table, but you know what I mean. It's just it's just tricky because it's Champions Queue is not meant to be totally open and accessible. Since on the reverse side, one of the feedback that we always hear from pros is hey, game quality is really, really important to us. So limit it more.
Right.
So it's trying to balance that, right? Because the pros, on the pro perspective, the whole purpose of Champions Queue is that it's the highest quality games. So it's trying to balance all of those different problem spaces in one jumbled fun mess.
So we're not getting Hawk an invite.
I guess this logic might make sense. Whoopley, you're breaking my heart, though, man. Gosh.
There are more qualifiers coming up if you want to get access. So.
True. Hey, Grapes. We putting a team together?
Yeah. Let's run it. All right. I got a suggestion for you, Whoopley. Maybe more on the NACL side, and maybe it's a little bit too late to deal with this already. But we know that there are 10 challenger teams that get in. There's 6 other teams that you guys hand selected. I think that there should have been a open qualifier bracket, last chance qualifier, similar to like the way Valorant did their challenger system, where we had 128 teams, 6 get out, enter the NACL.
Uh-huh.
And I can cast all of them.
Yeah, that's
so
the
you're saying
important part, right?
You're saying going forward, or just for like the
For
launch?
like, well, I guess now that promotion relegation exists, maybe not anymore, but
Yeah,
entering this first tournament, that would have been really. I feel like that would have been really cool.
I agree. That would have been sick. That was hard to do given the timelines for implementing these changes,
Fair.
like with the whole
Yeah.
rebrand and like fairly intense structural changes. Yeah, that would have been cool, but at the end of the day, it's sort of like we need to do what we could within the time that we had in order to get everything up and running for this year.
That's valid.
Logistics sometimes just take priority. I get it. I understand.
It's a boring, unfun answer.
Great, Grapes. I want you to do your second one first because I think my super serious second one should be last.
Okay. My next suggestion here, as Hawk is, I guess, typing in the responses here.
Yeah, I kind of bungled the production on your first one, so sorry about that.
Imagine I'm writing with a pen right now. But best
I'm
of
so
twos
immersed.
for NACL. Obviously, ties are boring. So if the series is tied 1-1, we take each of the players and we give them, we take each of the teams. They bring one challenger forward. They do a 1v1 on Howling Abyss, and the winner, the most skilled player in that matchup, comes away with the victory in the series.
So, not this specifically, but this type of idea has actually been discussed before.
Does it really?
So it's a little bit different. The idea is one of the things, like the idea of 1v1s comes up because we don't really have any like actually in the ecosystem, but they're like super fun to watch, and like how indicative is it of player skill? Like it's probably not a ton, but like there is skill involved. And so one of the ideas that we've talked about before is like, oh, what if we could like figure out like side selection in like a best of 3 series or something where it's like, whoever gets side selection is the 1v1 tournament, or like, weird like low stakes versions of that. I think tiebreakers maybe is a little too high stakes for that. But we have tried to see if there's cool opportunities to sneak in 1v1s somewhere.
That's actually
Awesome.
a really cool answer. I didn't expect that.
I do have to get on a little bit of a product pedestal here, which is to say that technically standings aren't they are best of 2s, but they're treated as best of 1s. So in other words, the actual standings is based on like pure number of wins. So we're trying to like not, because fans get that confused a lot. They assume like, oh, it's a tie, so it's like it's based on your series score as opposed to your match score, and so it's I'm being nitpicky about that.
But the winner of the 1v1 would just get the ego boost at the end of the day, and that's the most important.
Pure bragging rights.
Yeah, just wait for a NACL version 2 next year, where we just get rid of the whole playoffs thing, and it's just the regular season just leads into straight 1v1 tournament.
I'm so down for that.
That would be a
That's
banger.
Not for the sake of like the talent environment, but just the pure entertainment. Like,
Yeah, I was gonna say that's how we really develop talent.
It's all fun and games until support wins the whole thing. Look, that's all I'm saying. But all right, for the last one, this is by far the most serious question of them all. Gotta like straighten my imaginary tie here. Whoopley, as the representative of Riot Games, why doesn't Mr. Beast have a team yet?
Good question. That would be cool. I am definitely not the person to answer that. But yeah, this type of idea is super interesting. I mean, hey, technically, if you wanted to, especially for the NACL, right? Open qualifiers, anybody could
True.
get a team in. It's just that easy, right? No blockers.
True.
thinking about
Someone
that,
send this to
actually.
Mr. Beast.
I actually was thinking about this in the context of Disguised Toast starting a Valorant team in the open qualifiers, and also just like Ludwig partnering with Moist Critical on Moist Esports, and how they were planning on maybe entering some different teams like that. Just like the idea of like influencer branded organizations just kind of making grassroots like strides in these systems. I know we saw some teams like Native kind of pop up in the NACLQ, so are you expecting more of that to kind of be a factor, especially with the addition of like relegation within the NACL?
Potentially. I mean, a lot of, I think, like the thing to keep in mind is that this is essentially us trying to like explore like this is gonna sound a weird way to say it, like explore value spaces. So like one of the other problems that we're trying to solve through the new ecosystem that we haven't really I guess talked about this far is the idea of like how do teams factor into all of this, because one of the other problems that we were trying to solve for is like there's a lot of teams that are interested in getting into the League of Legends space, interested in investing, or have operated in the amateur League of Legends space for years, right? A lot of the familiar names that you see, right, that are competing in the NACL qualifiers, a lot of them have just been doing it out of a passion project, right? And for them, the trick is like they love it, they want to support it, it's great for the ecosystem, but financially, it's just sort of bleeding money. So one of the things that we're also trying to do is like, hey, how can we create more opportunities for these orgs to actually feel like they're able to be, have a bigger voice at the table, be able to have opportunities to prove themselves, and show off their value as an organization within the League of Legends ecosystem. And so that's also one of the things that we're trying to address here.
Very nice. I think that's all the questions that we have.
All of the super serious pitches, of course.
Have we been hired by Riot to implement these changes here?
Well, I'll have my people, contact your people, and well, we'll leave it to them.
The PR answer. The PR answer. Okay. Yeah. We see it.
What would help though in your application is I want to see the SR Salty Runback official team. The NACLQ's, it's saying there's many tournaments left in the year.
Grapes, we got to get on this.
I mean, this is actually an idea.
We've been challenged. Like, yeah.
You might have spawned something here, Whoopley.
The door is open.
Right,
that's worth thinking about, Grapes.
I think that, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but either way, I mean, like Grape said, that's all the questions we have for you. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. This was really awesome hearing all the insight about NACL and stuff. I know you said you don't get to do this that much, so I'm really glad we were able to, let you talk about the scene. I guess before we totally wrap the interview, was there anything you wanted to talk about or wanted to say or shout out whatever that you didn't get to?
Well, I mean, I guess first of all, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, this was super, super fun, and hopefully you guys found it insightful or interesting, or at the very least, my answers weren't like total, resident sleeper.
No, this is great.
But yeah, I mean, I guess sort of speaking more broadly, one of the things that's like really important to me with the stuff that I work on is trying to communicate as much as possible to the folks that are involved with the scene or even just a fan. Like we're super open and receptive and always on like the lookout for feedback, whether that is, super helpful Reddit threads.
Super helpful, yes, all the time.
And or constructive Twitch chat comments, right? Like we read,
of course,
all of those.
We love Twitch chat.
But at the end of the day, like we're just trying to create things that specifically NA fans really excite them, right? Find interesting, find fun to engage with, find like meaningful and respective of their time and all of that good stuff. So I guess if anyone wants to at me for feedback and or reach out in DMs, I'm Whoopley on Twitter. That's probably the best way to hit me up. But in general, like anything specifically for NACL, we always keep an eye on all the NACL hashtags. And yeah, just hopefully you enjoy the stuff that we do.
I was gonna ask you to shout your stuff out on all the platforms, but it seems like you're kind of a professional at doing this already, or something. You know the plugs. And
I lucked into it, I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much again, Whoopley. This was actually really insightful. I hope all the people watching at home also kind of got a lot of information out of this. And yeah, I mean, I'm super excited to see how the NACL continues to work forward this next year. Champs Q streams, again, praise that they come back on. And yeah, promotion relegations and everything else like that. So thank you very much, Whoopley. It was a pleasure.
Woo! NACL, Champs Q.
Woo!
Wow, thank you very much to Whoopley once again for the interview. We learned a lot of really cool stuff in there, didn't we?
Yeah, that was great. That was really great. Again, like Grape said, shout out to Whoopley. We hope you all thought that he had some good stuff to say and learned something interesting. Maybe, I don't know, we got to the bottom of why Mr. Beast may or may not have an LCS team at some point, so there you go. But either way, that's been this episode. We hope you all enjoyed. As always, Salty Runback Pod on all socials, Twitter, YouTube, Apple Music and Spotify, as well as Twitch as well. Salty Runback Pod. Shoot us a DM on Twitter. Shoot us an email at saltyrunbackpod@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. We'd love to continue the conversation. Make sure that this weekend you catch the continuation of the NACL qualifiers on this stream, as well as Smack's stream. Alk Battery starting up his stream as well, and Grapes, the official Rally Cry stream is starting up as well. I heard.
Yeah.
I guess you're not going to be on it this week, but next
I'll be
week
on next
starting.
week. Yeah.
So there you go. So be sure to
No
catch Grapes
spoilers.
on that, and catch all of our lovely friends doing that. It's going to be amazing. You are not going to want to miss the action. And hey, Grapes, as always, if you disagree with what we said, you can take it with a grain of salt. I've been Hawk. That's been Grapes. Have a good night, everyone.